Good evening, everyone. I see people joining on the session right now. I'm Jamie Anderson. I'm going to be one of your co-hosts this evening. We're just going to give people a little bit of time to get into the session. I see the numbers going up. Really fantastic number of registrations tonight. Over 175 people registered for the session from all over the world, from North America, Asia Pacific, across Europe, of course. So I think we're going to be in for a very good and interactive session. So let's just give it a few more seconds. I see people still coming in and we're going to go live in just a moment. Okay, so good evening, everyone. I see people still joining, but we're going to kick off the session. My name is Jamie Anderson. I'm going to be your co-host this morning, wherever you are, evening my time. And I'm going to be joined by Brent Bookwalter and David Spindler. As I said, my name is Jamie Anderson. I'm an Australian living in Belgium. I'm a leadership professor and also work on helping professional athletes with career transitions. This is actually the second webinar in the series. I'm going to say a little bit more about what we did last week in a moment, but with that, I'd like to invite Brent and David to join us in the session and invite Brent to, first of all, say a few words about the Pro Cyclist Foundation. So over to you, Brent.
Thank you, Jamie. On behalf of the Pro Cyclist Foundation, welcome back, or welcome to, if it's your first time here at this webinar series. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Pro Cyclist Foundation, the mission of the foundation is to serve developing, current, and retired professional cyclists with career, wellness, and legal support. And really one of the things that makes this foundation so unique is that it's not tied to a specific team or governing body or nationality. The foundation was founded and is based in the USA, but is in the future looking to diversify more and more support across nationalities and disciplines of the sport as well. So this series of webinars is one of the foundation's first of many efforts into this realm of wellness and performance psychology. And personally, I'm really excited to be a part of bringing that to you, because during my career, I saw firsthand and with my teammates that these areas of wellness, psychology were really overlooked, difficult to navigate, and underutilized, just tricky stuff. So we have a great team here, really excited and grateful to be able to connect you with David Spindler, Dr. Spindler, and Jamie Anderson. They have a lot of expertise, experience, and wisdom in this area, and hope you enjoy. Feel free to chime in questions into the chat box, and definitely email us info@procyclistfoundation.org. if you have any questions. I'll pass it back to Jamie and David now to get us going, and hope you enjoy.
That's excellent, Brent. Thanks a lot. And you did mention very, very important. We do always want these sessions to be interactive. So if anyone had a question or comment during the session, please do put your comments in the chat box. We tend to just use the chat box instead of both Q&A and chat because we're not great at multitasking. And of course, Brent, you did say a few words about yourself, but of course, you're recently retired from pro cycling competition. And how have you been finding the transition so far?
Yeah, I'm fresh into it. 2 weeks further into it than the last webinar, which feels like a lot. It's a big percentage of it, but yeah, it's up and down. It's got its challenges. I'm figuring out what the bike means in my life, and enjoying more time at home with the family. But yeah, it's a little weird to be watching the races rolling out without me, and still a fan, still following along my old friends and teammates and wishing them well.
That's great. Okay, Brent, I'm sure we're going to draw you back into the session a little bit later, but thanks a lot for kicking things off for us. David, over to you. You want to say a few words to introduce yourself for those people who may be joining this webinar for the first time?
Hello, everyone, either again or for the first time. My name's Dr. David Spindler. I'm a psychological and cognitive neuroscience scientist, specializing in endurance activity and athlete wellbeing. I contract some of the world's best teams within the overall athletic world, not just in cycling, but I also have contracts with a major energy drink company, and athletes include Formula One, MotoGP, AMA Supercross, FIM Motocross, and more recently into some combat sports. So I'm affiliated with the University of Maastricht for my research. So.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, David. Now, we should mention as well, David had an accident just a few days ago and actually has a couple of broken ribs. So we've actually we have to make the appeal in the chat, because on our first webinar, we had quite a few, I think they were some Australian blokes actually on the call, David, who were cracking funnies constantly in the chat box. So we have to tell people just to restrain themselves with the humor this session, because we don't want David to laugh, all right? But let's jump right in. Yeah, now the other guy, of course, we always mention is Ramandeep Singh. He's behind the scenes. He's helping us do everything on the webinar series in terms of all the tech backup, feedback, and so on. So, look, overall, obviously we had our first webinar 2 weeks ago where we talked about really set the stage in terms of having people understand what we mean by mental health literacy, some of the fundamentals, and how important actually mental health and well-being is to a successful career. What we're going to be focusing on tonight is maintaining high performance, and particularly self-care strategies. And then in 2 weeks' time, we'll come for our third webinar, which will be more focused on career phases and transitions. But I thought, David, it might be worthwhile for us just to recap a little bit on webinar 1, because we did cover some pretty important concepts.
Yes.
And one of those concepts actually that we spoke to was actually the environment, those people, systems surrounding the athlete, and how important that was. So maybe you can spend a few seconds talking about that, and then we'll move into talking a bit more about what we're going to cover today.
Yeah, okay. So what we really recapped on was what the environment is and what is the performance, what I call the performance bubble, or what others, obviously not, it's definitely not my term. However, the performance bubble, what are they? Well, first of all, they're your support crew. They're your mental health and wellness check-ins. They're those that hold an athlete accountable and understand the needs of an athlete, and more importantly, as a valuable member of society. They're important because they are your support network, pretty much. And a healthy athlete, as we know from the research, is more likely to succeed than someone who is less healthy. And that's not just physiologically. Most importantly, within these webinars, it's the mental portion as well, the psychological portion. So, yeah.
Yeah, very important. And as we spoke about last week, obviously, a lot of what we're talking about in these sessions is focused on you, the individual athlete, and in a way, you embracing your own health and well-being, but also that bubble you have around you, your coaches, friends, relatives, and so on. But also it varies a lot. We spoke about this last week, depending on, the country you're in, or the region you're in, the federation you're in terms of the other levels, which you see here on the chart in terms of your sporting support, and even, at the national level, say Olympic, or other international bodies that can be on a national level helping you. So what we explained last week was just for you to try to understand, what that wider system looks like, in which you're operating in. The other thing that we did talk about last week was that there are actually, 3 very important pillars to your mental health. The first one there was what we spoke about, was just really that ability to recognize in yourself if there might be issues. What we then talked about was beyond that, the certain factors that you need to systematically think about and address, and then ultimately also to acknowledge the attitudes and approaches of people around you. All right. So again, we're going to recap some of these today. But David, obviously these were things you talked about in terms of an athlete needing to understand as a plan, just as they might understand training plans.
Yep, exactly. So it's not just a physiological portion that makes an athlete be high performance or just produce any performance. There is a large psychological component to that. There's a really large proportion that is set towards a physiological proportion when it comes to how athletes are categorized within the sport. However, the psychological portion is something that's really been lacking, and one of the things that we're trying to do at the Pro Cyclist Foundation is to increase the awareness of what mental health and wellness is, and then how to get help if there is a need, either by the athlete or anyone within the support network, to actually if it becomes a detriment to not only performance but overall health, where to get that health and how to get that health, and understand that it's not a weakness, it's actually a strength, to be able to ask for help.
Yep. And obviously we're going to go into more detail right now on what might trigger that need, or the recognition of that need for reaching out for help. And of course, one of those triggers is anxiety, the stress. So maybe we should talk specifically about anxiety actually as one of the real triggers for people to recognize that they may have a mental health support need. How do you define anxiety, David, and how can people sense that it's coming on for them?
Well, how do I define it? Sort of more to the science behind it. It's really it's an emotion characterized by feelings of tension, worried thoughts, physical changes, including but not only increased blood pressure. There's some sweating involved as well, so a galvanic response. So anxiety is something that really needs your attention, because it can actually be really maladaptive when it comes to any types of performance sport. So,
yeah. And how is anxiety different from stress? Because sometimes just hear people saying I'm stressed, and is there an overlap? Is it the same thing? I mean, how do we think about the difference between the two?
So physiologically, there's really not that much difference. However, how it manifests itself, there is most definitely. So the difference being it becomes maladaptive. So that stress response, it comes to a point where the coping mechanisms fail to cope. However, there needs to be, like stress, there needs to be a slight portion of anxiety, and we'll cover that sort of later on within the webinar. But yeah, there is quite important difference, and for the interests of what we're doing here, it is when it becomes maladaptive.
Yeah, and when you say maladaptive, what does that mean in practice?
Sorry, beg your pardon? I missed that.
When you say maladaptive, what does that actually mean in practice for an athlete?
When it gets to a point where you either can't function, or your everyday function becomes less than optimal. Is more than, it's probably easier, better wording. So
yeah. And on that point, so what could be some of the symptoms? When we talk about people, there's stress factors, and then that leads on to anxiety. Mm-hmm. What can be some of the just the real physical sensations that people might be experiencing when this anxiety starts to manifest itself?
Increased sweating, so galvanic response. Some trembling sometimes. It depends on how acute that anxiety response would be. Sometimes dizziness, increased respiratory response, so shorter breaths, so they're not that deep breathing that you see normally when you're less, when that anxiety response is not there. More rapid heartbeat, or feeling of the heart coming through the chest even. But yeah, they are some of the symptomology of an acute anxiety response. Yes.
Yeah. Now, can you talk to us as well? Because I mean, in fact, one of the things we were chatting about a couple of days ago actually is this understanding actually in the literature and with regard to performance, that actually a certain degree of stress is in a way good, is necessary, because what that does is acts as a motivator. Like we talk about being stretched or being pushed out of your comfort zone. Can you talk to us a little bit about this chart and how we think about that with regard to cycling and athletes?
Yes, it's actually called the inverted U. It's been around since the early 20th century, so 1908 or 1909 or something like that. I think the first bit came through. But what it actually means is you can't be so laid back you're standing on your head. You need to have some stress response or some mechanism to to activate your brain and your body to get ready to do an endurance activity. And that's what sort of this slightly inverted U is looking for, is if you're one side of the spectrum, you can't perform to your best. Obviously, the same thing, if you're in the other side of the spectrum, you can't perform either, because that anxiety response hits too much. So somewhere in the middle is what we're looking at here. That is the ideal optimum performance state.
Yeah. And can you talk about this over the course of a career, David? Because again, one of the things we talked about last week, and actually we had quite some questions on related to how health, mental health, and well-being changes, in terms of the life phases that people go through and the career phases that people go through. So for you, having worked with obviously very young athletes, with mid-career and then late career athletes, how do the onset of these anxieties or stresses change over that career phase?
Well, because I actually haven't haven't worked long enough to have clients that have been retired. So I'm not old enough for that. But what I do see, and what I have seen, is that almost everyone that has a stress or an anxiety response sort of later on in their career have had issues as an earlier athlete as well, that haven't dealt with those successfully enough to be able to move forward, or haven't sought help. So early on in career, what we see mostly is how they may perform at either a local level or a national state championship. Then from there, it's how to progress through the career. And they may put a lot of pressure on themselves internally, and there may be external stresses to that performance as well. Parents or anyone within the national selection maybe that creates that anxiety response. Then, from there, if you're fortunate enough to sign a contract, how do you keep it? And then from there, where do you live? Maybe there's if you're from Australia or the US or even the UK, where do you actually live? Where do you base yourself? Where are the supermarkets? I had an athlete where I was working for that was a professional cyclist, but we didn't realize why he wasn't performing after a few months, and he was too scared to ask somebody where the supermarket was. So he just went to the local little one that only had rice and some really small supermarket, but he's just too scared. So he didn't have that performance bubble to be able to say, or didn't have the confidence to be able to say to someone of his peers, can you just tell me where the supermarket is? Or just, So from that perspective, then moving on is, how do you transition? What am I going to do after career? Have I made enough money? The majority of the answer to that is no. What am I going to do post career? You're on here a long time.
We definitely come to that point of later career a little bit later in this session. But I'm curious to re-emphasize a bit, I guess, what you said there, David, which is, obviously if you have a young athlete that has anxieties and has difficulty struggling with those, they may be performing physiologically, they may be delivering results. But, one of the things that I've witnessed in my interaction with some of these young athletes is they think that, if I just make it to the next phase, those anxieties will go away. If I get the next level of success, then I'll be happier, or I'll be more more satisfied, and often that's not the case. So what can we do, or what should we be doing with these younger athletes that are already displaying these signs of anxiety?
Get them help. Give them a chance to be vulnerable. Like, find, if you are somebody who's in that support bubble, try and be the person that they want to go to for help. It's a huge responsibility, and I understand that. However, if you want to get into the development portion of any athletic career, then that's the person that you need to be. And who do you go and see? Again, that's that mental health literacy portion of this as well, is being the person that, if you are the person that the athlete thinks I can go to be vulnerable, then who in your wider network can you take that athlete to get them the help that they need? And the faster you do that, the better the outcome and the more successful the outcome that is. So and you see that over and over and over again. There's lots of research that suggests that. So
yeah, I'm curious actually at this point, maybe we can invite Brent back into the discussion, because obviously, he's lived this, he's been through different phases of his career. Brent, can you maybe talk to us about, obviously, because throughout your career, you had moving goals, you had moving objectives, you had, different ambitions. How did you experience anxiety, stress, and how did you deal with that?
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, it was it was nonstop. I could have used David or a professional more often. I think I did a okay job building my bubble, and it was a work in progress and a journey, like every facet of my career. But when I was thinking back and reflecting on my career in that area, one of the kind of questions or areas I wanted to pose to David, Dr. Spindler here, kind of two of them that jumped out at me. One, the real obvious one right now, it's early season. The first big stage races are happening. The weather's gnarly. There's already been a bunch of crashes. So I imagine some of the attendees here tonight are hurt, busted up, or sick, whether it be COVID or any, the Peri-Nice plague or and that was, that was an area of my career, the injuries or illness, and navigating that internal and external pressure, from, whether it's, my own drive or it's team managers, directors, the pressure that I'm feeling from them or from family members or friends, and not wanting to let anyone down. So that's a big one. And then I'll go throw the other one out there right now too. That Jamie kind of touched on it, but it was kind of that moving goalpost concept of, like, I felt like in my career, I would just get to the point where I was like feeling good about it. Like, say I'm a great teammate and I can ride grand tours and I can do it. And then all of a sudden, the team directors and management are like, that's not enough anymore. Now we want you to perform too. And that was also internal. I wanted to get results, and I wanted to navigate, like, to improve also myself. So yeah, I guess, my question or concept for Dr. Spindler here is sort of how could I have better managed that internal and external pressure in a healthy way, whether it be injuries or those moving goalposts, or similar scenarios.
So first of all, let's address the moving goalpost portion, which is that will and always should happen as you progress through, because if you don't have that, then the drive to succeed is not going to be there. I would argue that's the reason why it made you a very good athlete, is that the goalposts actually need to move, because if they didn't, you'd still be in your junior category, or you'd be, you'd still be, you wouldn't be as successful. What is unclear and within the structures that I've seen is how the sports directors and how management of the team actually communicate what they want from an athlete. They don't have the I was going to say they don't have the resources, but they haven't been given some professional development to actually tell the athlete that this is what we expect now. If you're good enough to do this specific role, then why shouldn't we actually say, well, this is your role now? But the way that that's communicated is traditionally done quite poorly, I've found. And some of the best teams in the world now have specific people, some organizational psychologists that do come in and work with their high performance team that does then work on the communication portion of that. That's only happened in the last 6 or 7 years, from what I've found. But what was the first portion again? Sorry.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Thank you. The injuries and the
Oh,
illness and navigating that, which is sort of the larger question at
Yes.
hand, is uncertainty.
Yeah.
It's an uncertain livelihood and world, and it's is really tough. Those times that I think it's one of the reasons I'm most happy to be on the other side of it now, is to move on from those pressure filled, anxiety filled moments of being injured or being sick and not knowing what's going to happen. Any insight or advice or techniques there to navigate that?
Yeah. So from that, if you've actually got to a point where you're a professional cyclist, or you've got to a point where you know you fit, doesn't matter where you are on that continuum, there is no evidence to suggest that that will never happen again. Yeah. So if you have broken a collarbone, or you've got, sick at the precise time that you've put a lot of you're emotionally invested in a result. Yes, that's disappointing, and it should be, because you've actually emotionally invested into what you need to do to move forward. However, the understanding should be that you don't lose class, you don't lose ability. That's innate in you. Like where you are now, there's no evidence whatsoever that is going to be your end point. So how do you get through this? That resilience piece is really important when it comes to this. Who you speak to is, again, that communication and it is, again, really important. And then having people around you that understand that you will be moody and you will have some insecurities in and around that sort of, your performance, that you may not be a nice person for 2, 3, 4 days, but be okay with that and work through that with you. Like that's not giving you a license to be not a nice person. However, obviously there is a piece there of, okay, my mood is going to be slightly lower than where it needs to be, and then how do I move forward from that? So yeah.
Great, good comments, David, and thanks for coming in on that, Brent. I mean, I guess the other big one that often hits people, David, is, obviously in cycling, we have people who are leading grand tours, we have people who are sprinters, we have people who are the classic specialists, and then we have, in a way, all of that support crew around them, and the domestics, and often you have someone who is actually taken maybe from a support role into a leadership role, and that brings all kinds of new stresses as well. Can you talk to us a little bit about that, about navigating that shift perhaps from being a team contributor to being a team leader, or someone who's expected actually really to deliver results?
Yeah, well, what I've found actually is that no one actually goes into the professional world thinking that they're just going to be a helper. So everyone starts at 12, 13, 14, however, whatever they start, as I'm either going to win Roubaix, I'm going to win Flanders, I'm going to win the Tour, or depending on where you are, the Giro, the Vuelta, whatever. It's always a winner. And then once you get into the professional realm, it becomes a team sport. And a lot of issues that we find coming into the professional era is, how do you navigate becoming a team sport from the lower categories where it's dog eat dog? And it kind of has to be, but it still needs to be that when it comes to professional sport. You still need to have those individual aspirations. However, it needs to be a larger umbrella of what is my actual role? How do I deliver that role? And how do I do it to the best of my ability? And there are stresses, again, because of the shifting goalposts along the way, and they have to be shifted, because if the goalposts aren't shifted, you haven't progressed in your career. So, so again, you have a look at some athletes that start off world champions in let's just say the time trial, that become super domestiques in the mountains, progressing their career, or someone who is a Roubaix winner all of a sudden gets to the Tour de France and they're a super domestique. So the role has to change. There's no one role within professional cycling when it comes So you need to be able to communicate effectively, and if you struggle with that, find somebody that can help you.
Understood. I guess we're also talking a lot here about obviously there's anxieties that come from within, right? So that can be related to insecurities, imposter syndrome, all kinds of stuff that we can bring with us. But there's also the extrinsic, right? So can you talk to us a little bit about that? Because obviously, particularly as you progress not only in your career but in your life, you may be having a partner, having children, you've got all kinds of these pressures. What do you see as some of the biggest, I guess, generators of stress and anxiety from that extrinsic perspective, and which are not perhaps directly related even to the sport?
Social media, with by miles, by absolute, and it does not matter how successful an athlete actually is. There is someone in the world that is either jealous of that person or doesn't like that person because has had an interaction. And if I had my way, there would be zero social media in. We've had this conversation already, Jamie, sort of personally, when it comes to social media, because it's a really important tool when it comes to marketing and it comes to sort of how the athlete is portrayed, because it actually, income now is actually related to some social media sort of, I don't know what you call it, was clout, or I don't know, but the largest extrinsic factor that I see right now, and it's only been obviously in the last few years, is social media. How an athlete manages what they can see and when they see it.
Yeah, so that's understood. And of course, we should point out that's also true for the general population.
Oh, totally. Yeah, absolutely.
It's not just, and particularly for younger people, for teenagers, for people in their early 20s, actually, who are still in many ways working out, what their values are, what's important to them. And one of the other things, of course, is that one of the things we start to recognize in your field is that when people don't have downtime, when people actually don't have time away from social media, when they're always on, they're losing that time for reflection and introspection, to put things into perspective in a way. So that's very clear for us.
And the further on you are in your career, you get to a point where you actually have a lot of, recovery is super, super important. Gets to a point where you think that your athletic career is a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week. I can only just do this one specific thing, or that's just what I do. However, I'm adamant that you can actually spend, 1 or 2 hours a day actually on self-improvement, whatever that is. It doesn't actually matter. There's a lot of athletes out there that across all sports that I see playing quite a lot of FIFA and quite a lot of, watching a lot of Netflix, right? And that takes the same amount of cognitive, it gives the same amount of cognitive fatigue as what it would be to actually do one subject at university, say. So that's my perspective.
I'm having a look at the chat box, and I think we might have scared people off with not cracking jokes and giving you a hard time with your broken rib.
I cannot laugh.
So we have to take it easy. But really, we would like, if you do have a question, if this is causing you some thoughts that you want to come in with, then just please do put your comments, questions in the chat box. We'd like to interact with you as well. But David, you are a huge advocate of personal development, educational development, because we do know that one of the biggest drivers of anxiety and stress is actually for athletes thinking about life after their career. But at the same time, many of them seem to push that aside. Actually, maybe Brent, it'd be interesting to bring you back into this discussion as well, because we know that during your career, Brent, I mean, you were a bit of a perfectionist. You were very, very focused on performance. How did you experience that yourself? At the same time, wanting to perform as an athlete, but then also knowing that there was this life after your professional career?
Yeah, I to be honest, I struggled with that. I definitely had my own perfectionist tendencies where I felt like I had to be all in on everything. And that definitely, I think, prevented me at times from thinking I could justify or warrant spending time on anything else, like whether it be considering planning for the future, or yeah, like extracurricular, even relationships, friends and family. Like there was often this thought that if I'm working on the future now or anything else, that means I'm not committed to being the best professional athlete that I can be. And I don't want to waste that. I want to make the most of it. Yeah. So yeah, whether it's like the hours in the day, or yeah, even like across to the relationships, like making sacrifices about, missing a wedding or a funeral or important friend's birthday. It was like, yeah, there was like this pull and this need of like needing to know I needed to be, 110% in until I'm out. And yeah, I'm not sure if I always, without a doubt, I didn't always handle that as I'm sure as well as I could have. So yeah, interesting. Dr. Spindler, if you could chime in there, if any thoughts on how I could more productively approach that challenge to get more performance and wellness too.
So this is actually one thing that not trying to be gender specific, but female athletes do this amazingly well. And that is to do extracurricular stuff that actually moves them ahead in life, not just in sport. So I see often there's a majority of female athletes that are actually doing a university degree or some type of course somewhere to better themselves, where males tend to, and I'm being stereotypical here, but I find this over and over and over and over again, is males just go, no, this is what I'm doing. This is how I'm doing it. And now the pay gap is getting smaller. It's still quite large, as we know, but it is getting smaller. But females are still doing this. They're still doing one or two subjects at university. They're still doing it, and they find the time. So what I don't understand is, given the same opportunities, why don't the males? Is it an ego thing? I don't know. Or is it a stereo? Is it a we've always done it this way, so this is the way we're going to do it?
But David, it may also, on that point as well, and be good again to get Brent's perspective, having been part of different teams, in what I've witnessed here, and here at the Flundrian Hotel, we welcome a lot of teams, from amateur, continental, pro continental, and different levels. And definitely what you have said, we definitely anecdotally see here in terms of teams that we have, male, female teams. With the female teams, it's typically more than 50% of the riders are actually studying while they're here, they're
doing something,
studying a degree, or they're doing something else. Definitely would agree with that. Now, again, that's anecdotal, that's not hard research, but we definitely see that. But the other thing is, it seems to me a little bit of a culture within a team. We have seen, definitely, I think, with the more we're working actually a little bit at the moment with NXTG, a team here in the Benelux. Very, very pro development of their riders, both obviously athletically, but also from an educational and personal development point of view, and that permeates the whole team.
Yes.
Whereas I've worked with some male teams where it's almost the opposite, that riders who are seen to be engaging in other curricular activities are maybe perceived to be not being serious or focused enough. I mean, I'd be curious to hear first from you about that, David, and maybe your experience as well, Brent.
So I would argue, and I'd like to think I'd argue quite successfully, that if you're stimulating your brain doing something that's non-cycling related, you are doing exactly, you are bettering yourself as a human, which will give you higher performance on the bike. And I've had some really large conversations with some fairly high profile managers when it comes to the men's peloton on this specific topic. So it's most of the time it is, if you're not invested, then why should we employ this person? However, what we see over and over again is that if if they have something slightly different away from being so singularly focused on an athletic activity, then the majority of the time that equates to performance as well, because they actually get removed. They stop vortexing themselves into their own headspace of whether it be, I've got a niggle in the knee, I've got, what nutrition do I need to eat tomorrow, all the rest of the stuff. If they're not that singular focus, we're not talking about a massive diversification here. We're just talking, parallel lines when it comes to attentional focus and cognitive fatigue of overall performance. But yeah, like, how do you better yourself? Again, you retired for such a long time.
Well, so, actually, I guess that's also an interest. I mean, the fact that we use the word retirement,
yes,
is
exactly.
It's just a transition into a different life stage. But I mean, interesting to hear from you, Brent. I mean, you were in that world. You were in the world tour. Just curious to get your take on that in terms of how, and we did talk here about male riders and some of their perceptions about if I'm seen to be studying or engaging in entrepreneurial activities, how that might be perceived by both teammates and staff as well.
Yeah, I definitely felt a pressure and accountability to just not want to waste anything other than my career. And that doesn't just say I wasn't interested, but I wanted to make the most of it. The other thing that really comes up to me when I think about that area is the challenge to compartmentalize it once I actually, so I think I did get better at this throughout my career. I think some maturity and perspective helped me to learn this and diversify my thinking and see some value in that. But I still was really constantly challenged by if I got into that other space, whether it be reading something or, spending time with a family member or a friend even, or meditating, or there was always like this challenge and distraction to not be totally there. And it was so much, I realized it was so much more impactful if I was. It was like if I could compartmentalize and I could say, when I'm on the bike, the messaging on my Garmin is off, like the music's off, I'm not checking my phone, like it's fully immersed in my training. But then when I'm, if I'm going to catch up with a friend for 30 minutes, like same thing. I'm going to put the phone down, just be there, fully immersed there. But that was hard and I wasn't very good at it. So I don't know, is there any psychological wisdom or perspective to aid in that, or is there is there value in that?
I can say something on that. I think definitely, Brent. I mean, I think that the trap that sometimes we fall into, that I've seen a lot of athletes fall into, is they don't know what they want to do, right? And look, there's nothing wrong with that, because most of us, for most of our lives, we don't really know what we want to do in life. Most people are between 15 years and 25 years old. It's not like, okay, my dream is to become an accountant. That's my passion. That's my purpose. No, parents, people around us, they say that's a good job for you. That's a good career for you. Now, maybe that's, and what I've observed with a lot of athletes is actually they don't know what they want to do after their pro career. And that's very normal, because most of the people who are in a career, the research on this shows that actually most people who are in a job don't like the job they're in anyway, right? They're just doing it because they were pushed in a particular curricular or career path. So my advice always to that is, if you don't know what it is you want to become, then follow your curiosity. If you're curious about history or politics or art or music, whatever it is, then follow your curiosity and learn about that area that you're curious about, right? And what that then actually does is not necessarily give you a hard functional, skill or expertise, but what it actually helps you do is learn how to learn, so that when you do come to a point where you realize this is the thing I want to do, then you've actually acquired that discipline and skill of acquiring knowledge. And the other thing that happens is often when you start to do stuff, you realize actually this is something that is not necessarily just about a hard skill, learning technical stuff, but actually it's something I've got a talent for. Now, again, some people we've talked about on the last webinar, someone like Mitch Docker, right? Mitch Docker, what did he discover? He discovered, well, Mitch is great at telling stories. He's great at talking to people. He's got a terrific, sense of humor. So where did he channel that? He channeled that into, Life Beyond the Pillow, his podcast. Right now, he didn't enter that with the intention that I'm going to become sort of some media guru or influencer. He did it because he enjoyed it. But as he enjoyed it, he acquired skills, and then he became more talented at what he was doing, and eventually that in a way headed him into perhaps a career beyond his race career. Does that make sense, David? I'm not sure.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, totally. But again, it's just a chapter. You're the one writing the book. So, and under no circumstances, if you're in, your athletic career is a chapter of your book that will close at some stage, hopefully years and years and years down the track. But again, just because, I've been a golf caddy before, I'm now sort of doing what I do now, like are two totally different things, absolutely diametrically opposed. And if I don't like what I'm doing now, I'm more than likely, just go, okay, well, I'm going to change and do something else. Again, it's just a chapter. But what people struggle with is what I find that people struggle with is the fear of the unknown. So that fear of the unknown is the frontal lobe. It's that anxiety response of just going, okay, well, what if? And my question to that is, well, what if? What is stopping you? Because nothing's stopping you when it comes to your athletic career. So the same skills transfer. The good part about, one of the best parts about being an athlete is it's a microcosm for your life. So whatever you're struggling with within your athletic career, I guarantee you'll be struggling with the post-athletic career. So you're better off dealing with it when you're younger, and your ability to change is a lot more malleable. So. Yeah.
But we should also say that, David, and again, Brent, I'll ask you a personal question, but how old are you now? How old are you turning this year, Brent?
38.
38. You see, now that's the amazing thing about that is you are still a very, very young person.
Yeah.
Because when we actually look at what we know now to be 100-year life, at 38, you have at least 30 to 35 more years of work ahead of you in terms of your intellectual capacity. So I think that's also something that we see, David, that many people say it's too late for me. It's too late for me to go back to school. It's too late for me to find a new vocation. Well, actually, that's rubbish, because I
started my PhD at that time.
Exactly right. So even in our mid 30s, late 30s, we're only halfway there professionally. Yep. So plenty of reason to be optimism. I think the message that we're saying to people, David, and I think this is the point we really I think we should move to now, is that ultimately it's the individual's responsibility and accountability to take hold of the things that we're talking about. And there's actually very good reason for that, because research shows that something like 70% of professional athletes across all sports are struggling financially within 5 to 7 years of retirement from their sporting careers. So, this is not frivolous. It's something actually that we need to
important
reflect upon, that's the reality. So, can you talk to us about that, David? I mean, how does that process of taking account of, because actually it seems like we're talking about two sides of the same coin, right?
Exactly.
People feel anxiety and stress because they're worried about what's going to happen to them after their competitive career. And yet on the other hand, they're not doing enough to actually start preparing for that transition.
Yeah, but the thing is, the other opposite side of that coin is because they're too scared to look beyond as well. So, but yeah, again, it's super important. Like you keep on saying, like your transition, your career transition, what you're going to do after is far more important, in my opinion, than whether you're going to get a World Tour contract. That's my belief. Like, if you're good enough to get a World Tour contract, you're going to get one anyway. So for you to then start progressing, what am I going to, you don't have to know exactly what you're going to do, but what is the trajectory? And life's a roller coaster, like it's not always it's not a linear thing. It's how you deal with those highs and lows to progress through life, to be able to get you to a spot where overall in your life, hopefully it's a good one. So, yeah.
But again, I think we're also coming back here to that performance bubble, right? And,
Yes,
and this is something
absolutely
in the first, first webinar together, which is there's obviously a real important for us to take ownership, to take accountability for thinking about who we are, where we want to go. And what that also requires is, I think, is this acknowledgement that it's okay not to be certain about what you're going to do after your career. That's okay. However, what I've observed, certainly, and again, I talk about the athletes that come in here to the Flandrian Hotel, it's very interesting when you have that dinner time conversation with someone who's just finished studying for 3 hours, right? Because I might ask them what they're studying, say, oh, well, actually, it's boring, I'm not really wild about it, but still they're creating that, in a way, I guess, confidence in themselves that they will have that other skill to fall back upon. Right?
It's almost like a mental flexibility that they've used their brain in a different capacity than what they are when it comes to riding their bike. So all of a sudden, those neural networks are firing. Like they're just they're not just, again, that single-minded portion. They've created a larger portion of themselves, pretty much. So therefore, that confidence comes out usually. And I've found exactly the same thing. But someone who's studied post, the conversation that you have with that person who's done something that's not a menial task, such as FIFA on PlayStation for the 3 hours before dinner or after dinner or whatever, the conversation that you get is far more advanced. And that cognitive flexibility is, again, I think, super important. If you don't use it, you lose it. The brain's exactly the same.
I remember that when I interviewed Adam Hansen for my YouTube channel, and I remember Adam saying that he was, that he didn't consider PlayStation a career-enhancing skill. He said there's not too many professional athletes who are going to go on to a professional gaming career, and yet he was saying that when, I don't need to name the team that Adam was writing for, but when you talk to people who are in these environments, sometimes I say, well, actually, some of my teammates are gaming 15, 20 hours a week. That's a lot of hours. That's about as many hours as a lot of people do on getting themselves a university degree. So,
in saying that too, they would say that that's a portion of their recovery. So the justification for that is I'm recovering from X, Y, Z, and getting myself prepared for the following days in advance. And but if you actually look at the research on cognitive fatigue, the cognitive fatigue of playing computer games for that amount of hours actually decreases your physical performance. So
understood. Understood. As a parent, I'm fully aware of that, Dave. I'm fully aware of that. That's an important point. Hey, but the other one as well, I listened to a fantastic interview just a couple of weeks ago. There was a race here in Belgium, and I can't remember the name. It was in Wallonia. And the guy who won it, actually, he's a dairy farmer. And it was just amazing listening to him after the race, because they were interviewing the guy and saying, well, you're going to go and celebrate tonight. He's like, well, no, I'm not, because I've got to wake up at 5 a.m. tomorrow morning and milk the cows. And as they were interviewing this guy, it was very interesting listening to him, because he was super happy to win a bike race. But what he was talking about was actually he's a dairy farmer. And he is racing his bike, but actually what he does is he milks the cows. So I guess what we're talking about here also is there's a lot of diversity in the pro peloton, right? I mean, there's people who already have maybe an undergrad or even a master's degree, they're in the peloton, and there's others who actually, their choice is to follow a different kind of career path. And I'm not saying either is good or bad. However, listening to this guy speak, you could hear, in a way, his groundedness, that he would be someone who would make a very smooth transition. Have you experienced anything similar to that in your interactions with professionals?
So what I've found is people athletes in general, or actually shouldn't say it, just even performance staff that actually have some type of plan or structure to move away from, so it's away from whatever, the athletic career or within that sports bubble, are far more together, so that you can see that they're sort of they're more resilient, they have more contentment, so the mood's usually higher as well, and because the what if question is what if, they're changing the context of that frontal lobe anxiety pretty much. So yeah, like if you have a plan in place, it doesn't have to be concrete. Like we've said that for the last hour now, but what would you like to do? What's the next? What makes you happiest? So yeah.
Clear. Good. Great. I'm just I'm aware of the time. Just having a quick look. If anyone has got any questions, you want to put them in the chat box. I've been addressing some of those questions as we go along, but we did give people the option to post some questions privately as well. So I brought some of those points into the discussion. Okay. So if people do have questions before we close it, please do share those with us. I think there's an important aspect to this as well, David, and again, just to help us to recap for people, is that what we're talking about here is a process, right?
Yes.
And what we're talking about throughout these webinars is the fact that there are these what we call foundational components. That's for people just to be aware of the mental health literacy that we're talking about, understanding and being in touch with their emotions, their feelings. Then there's this sort of process of detection, whether that's certainly individually or from that bubble around it. Maybe just quickly talk to us about these different levels. And again, what we're going to move towards in the third webinar is helping people, if necessary, to move to really that top of the pyramid where they do need to seek out some specialist help.
Yeah. So again, this is where the performance bubble comes in. This mental health literacy we keep on harping on about, but it's, again, we're doing that because it's really important. So what are the components? How do you get help? Where do you get help from? Who do you feel most comfortable being vulnerable to? Can you be vulnerable? Can someone come to you to be vulnerable to? Which is that foundational piece, the lower part of that pyramid. And then that is the prevention components is, how do we minimize that risk before it gets to a point that, again, that word maladaptive, it becomes a detriment to your overall life. So that early detection is really super important. And then from, that if that doesn't happen, or if it becomes more acute than that, then that early intervention is, again, really important, which is, the anxiety response and things that actually don't require like really specialist care that you can do with your performance bubble. That will be that early intervention portion. But then if it gets to a point where it becomes a detriment to everyday life, doesn't have not necessarily your athletic career at all, the specialist care, it's okay not to be okay. So there's strength in character in getting help. So it's not like asking for help is not a weakness. I can't stress that enough, that there is absolute strength in character when it comes to, I need to get help. How can I get help? And where is that? But also it's okay to be scared for that to happen at the same time. So find people that help you.
I think that's something we've spoken about throughout, these webinars, the fact that, as an athlete, we have no hesitation at reaching out when we have a physical problem,
yes,
a knee, hip problem, whatever it might be. And it should be the same when it comes to mental health and well-being. If we
but it needs to be the right person for you.
Exactly. Good. So we're the time, Dave. Thanks a lot. I mean, as always, it's been a fascinating discussion. Thanks also to Brent for coming in on the discussion in this session. What we will do is just briefly talk to you a little bit about what's going to happen next time, because we will be moving on. We have another webinar again in 2 weeks' time. We have touched on it, of course, this week, but we're going to go much deeper next time into career phases and transitions, how to think about those phases and prepare for life after the peloton. That will be the topic for the next session. What we would also, of course, love people to do is please stay around just for a minute or so after we close, because we will be posting the link to the survey, the feedback survey, in the chat box as well. So please do click on that. Actually, it's right there now. So please do click on the link and give us your feedback from the session. And with that, what I'd like to do is, on behalf of course, the Pro Cyclist Foundation, Brent and David, is just to thank everybody for joining us again for this session. And hopefully we'll see you again soon. So thanks, guys. It's been great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.